Hey, it's Andrew, and we're about to have another featured interview here, standard typical video presentation. But I just want to leave a quick message before we got into it because, well, one, quick apologies. The video that we have here that you're about to see on the Zoom connection, there were a bunch of glitches, a bunch of internet issues. Me and my team did our best to kind of smooth those out, but they won't be perfect. So apologies in advance for that. But more importantly, as I start to interview more people and as I'm having more different points of view, that are being presented that may or may not reflect my own, I think it's important to kind of like remind people that you might expect a lot on these interviews with these awesome people to hear things that sometimes aren't exactly in resonance specifically with what I've said in the past. For example, what you're going to hear on this interview with Michele, who's awesome, who has a podcast that's reaching 120 countries and has been downloaded over 120,000 times, which is amazing. One thing she brings up in this is how she tried an experiment trying to say only good things for a complete and full week, which I think is awesome, but has never been my approach. My approach would be more of like, just do a few minutes a day, way less pressure, let that momentum carry you. And I guess the key thing here is it doesn't matter which way you do as long as you have a which way works for you. But I guess, again, this is a good opportunity to remind you that you might start hearing things from my guests that won't be exact the way I say it, but that doesn't mean that there isn't something to be had for you. It doesn't mean that the approach might not work for you. Another example is she mentioned that she views bad results as indicators of things that you need to consciously heal within you. Again, my style is skipping that part, just using the methods, let the healing come about, automatically in and of itself. And again, there's no wrong or right answer to this except for the one that works for you. So again, this is my disclaimer now that we're starting to have a lot more interviews here, a lot more perspectives, that we're going to have different points of view on certain things, but you're also going to find that me and Michele are really on the same page about a lot of other things. And I'm so excited to share her with you. She cares so much. She really knows her stuff. She is a total boss at this stuff, and she really has a wonderful following, and you can tell that she deeply cares about helping people find results. So I really hope you'll enjoy this conversation. Again, apologies for any glitches that you see, and enjoy the interview. Ready to get started?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey everyone, Andrew here, otherwise known as that guy who wrote the last Law of Attraction book you'll ever need to read. And I've got a really special interview guest today, Michele Joy. I found her by being on her show. And as we were going through our process of her interviewing me and just sharing ideas and viewpoints, it became very clear to me, obviously, no surprise given her show, she had tremendous insights into the law of attraction that I thought might be fun to share with my audience. So with that in mind, Michele, thanks so much for being here and welcome to my YouTube channel.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I had so much fun having you on my show, and we just jived so well. And I'm like, it was such a great, juicy conversation. So I'm super happy to be back connecting with you again. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a fun conversation. I'll remember to put the link in the description of this, because for anybody that didn't find the email that I sent out to my readers, they'll still be able to check it out. And I highly recommend they do, because again, I was very impressed by just your mindset and your approach to the topic. And it's so interesting because there's so many different directions that I already know that I want to go into, but I guess, just it makes the most sense to kind of ask like how you kind of came about the law of attraction to begin with. And, what really got you going in that direction, even inspired you to do the show that you're doing right now?
Awesome. Well, it all started after my divorce, and I was with my ex-husband for 16 years, and it was a devastating divorce. Like many of us go through those, right? It was one of those moments of like, oh crap, what am I going to do with myself? And I'm a complete wreck. But the main reason I was a wreck is because I didn't know who I was. And so I started diving into personal development, like many of us do after we go something as traumatic as that. And I started to understand that I'm attracting these situations. And I didn't really hear the word law of attraction yet, but I started to understand like, okay, how could I stop attracting stuff like that? Like, how could I stop doing that? But it wasn't until after dating for about a year, I don't know if it wasn't a year, it was probably like 6 months. And I was like, this dating scene sucks. This is hard. I'm a single mom. I'm in my mid 30s. Like, I had all these horrible tapes, like I'll never find in love again and dating so hard. And someone told me about the law of attraction. And she says, Michelle, you can manifest your soulmate. Like you can attract them to you. And I'm like, oh, cool. So I don't actually have to go looking for them. She goes, no. I'm like, I'm in. I'm sold. And so that was actually how I started law of attraction, was more out of desperation, to be honest, because I hated dating. But what's interesting is because I was so committed to my personal development, I'm so committed to knowing me, because I did not do that for so many years. I started to meditate, because that was the one thing I said to myself, I need to be real with myself, and I need to know who I am. And I figured meditation is the way to do it. And after only 3 months of meditating, I had a spiritual awakening. And it was one of those moments where it felt like an eternity, but through meditation, I saw like a slither of light. And within that slither was this knowing of, this is the universal energy. This is my truth. This is everything. And this love was overwhelming. I was like brought to tears, and I felt like I was downloaded everything about life without even knowing what the questions were to ask. Like it was like almost like I was a step ahead of myself. But the only thing I knew in that moment was I had I had a divine purpose. And I knew there was something within me that was powerful that needed to come out. So at that point, which is crazy, Andrew, is I was literally led. I was a nurse at the time. I loved what I did, but because of that awakening, I kept getting like curious, and it became insatiable. I wanted to learn. I wanted to know. I wanted to understand how the universe works, because that feeling I had was so real. And I kept attracting, situations at that point. I just kept, again, I didn't think I'd leave nursing, but I was drawn to this book called The Soul Loves the Truth by Denise Lynn. And in that, she offers a course to certify soul coaches. And I'm like, yes, I want to meet this woman. I want to be like her. I don't know why, but I just have to do it. And so I felt so drawn, and all these synchronicities happened after I said yes to her course. But what soul coaching does, it opens you up to who you really are. It connects you to your truths, which is what I was working on, right? And so after I did my training, I came back home. I live in Portland, Oregon, and that training was in San Luis Obispo, California. And I came home, and she said, well, if you want to get your message out, go to meetups. And that's a way to like let people know. But I was a single mom. I worked 12-hour night shifts as a nurse. I didn't have family nearby. So I'm like, I can't really go to these meetups, but I signed up for a lot of them anyway. And one of them I signed up for was called the Law of Attraction for Happiness. Well, I didn't have, like I said, any time to go. But one time I got an email, which, we get all these emails from different meetups, and I never opened it. But this one, I'm like, I need to open this. And I opened it, and it said, does anyone want to take over this group? It's an established group. They have 500 members, and we're looking for a new facilitator. So immediately, because I felt like pulled, I said, yes, I'll take it over. And yet I had never taught a class before, never been to the group. And here I offered to take it over. So it's one of those like divine pulls where you're like, yes. And you're like, why do you do that? Like, how can I change that? But what happened, Andrew, is I felt absolutely guided in every class I started teaching. And I felt like, wow, I love law of attraction. Like I love teaching it. I taught it every other week for 6.5 years. The group grew from 500 people to 2,200 people before I stopped it about 3 years ago. And so again, I just kept following the breadcrumbs, kept being pulled. So that's my big message to people, is what I talk about is how are you pulled? And then 2.5 years ago, I decided to leave nursing altogether. It was one of those crazy, I'm going to leap without a safety net moment. But I felt so strongly that I had this universal energy helping me on my path. And I had a book I'd written, I couldn't get it out. So I finally got my book out. And then I finally did the full-time entrepreneurship. And then again, it was another divine download. Michelle, why don't you start teaching on podcasts? I'm like, I've never done a podcast before. I've never even listened to a podcast, honestly. And I started it in 2018, and I'm now at over 110,000 listeners and heard in 100 countries. And it was one of like, oh my God, how did this happen? So that's the thing I teach so strongly is it's when you listen to the divine the breadcrumbs and the clues and you follow it, life turns out miraculous. So in a nutshell, that's how I ended up here.
Right. And so it sounds to me like you were really following your gut along this path and really, I mean, I'm not sure we all question things on a certain level, but you certainly weren't questioning things to the point where you were stopping yourself. It was more like you were just saying yes to those
Yes.
little nudges and going along the way. And, obviously you were interviewing me last time, so I didn't know all this history about you. I was really, again, I was paying close attention to the things you were saying and the way you were responding to what I was saying and those little things. And one thing that I remember correctly, I think, I'm not sure which one of us said it first. I think I was talking about using joy as a strategy. And you
Mm-hmm.
got an immediate reaction to that. Like, yeah, like I teach joy a lot. And I really wanted to cop on that because, you know, joy to me, obviously, it really is a strategy. It's the way by which, well, one, you enjoy your life because who doesn't want to do it? But it simultaneously does serve as this thing where, as you're employing it, it's inviting and attracting more things to be joyful about. So therefore, it really does become a strategy. And I was curious, since you were in such agreement when I was saying that,
Mm-hmm.
what are the ways by which you encourage people to be joyful when you're extending your message out there?
Well, I love that you say that because it is absolutely crucial. And I didn't realize that all these things that I was doing connected. One thing I didn't share, I also became a certified happiness coach. Again, not understanding why. But now, because when you listen to Abraham Hicks, Abraham always talks about get into that high vibration, get into alignment, and then you'll match up to all that you were asking for. And so before I had the idea of the podcast, I was struggling for the first 6 months as an entrepreneur. Like many of us entrepreneurs, like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Like, this is not as easy as I thought it'd be. But I kept coming back to joy. I'm like, okay, Michele, it's okay that things aren't going as well as I want them to, but I'm going to do whatever I can to get into a place of joy. So within 6 months, when I got that divine download for my podcast, I also got the download to do a video series called 365 Days of Joy. So I wanted for every day for a year to show people and myself, mostly myself, but people too, how
Mm.
important it is to connect with your joy. And every morning I woke up and I learned this through my happiness coaching training. I said, what is joy asking me? And then I do it. And what happens is, and this is why I love that you say this is the process, because I love what you share about how important it is to enjoy the process. When we enjoy it, then it's about the journey. And also because I worked as a nurse, I worked in hospice for the last 2 years before I quit nursing. I was seeing death every day. And it really got loud to me that we need to enjoy life. It's more about enjoying life than getting things. Life is about experiences, but we need to enjoy it now. And so it is a process. And I love that I never thought of that when you said that. But for now, I see joy as like something that we can all do right now. Every moment of our day, we can say, what is joy asking me? And we understand when we're in that place of joy, we will attract more, because law of attraction says when you raise your vibration, you get to that same place, that feeling good place. The universe goes, oh, that's an open vessel. We're going to just plop these situations in that you've been asking for.
Hmm.
But all you need to do is get into that higher place of vibration, right? At
Yeah.
least it's a big, big step.
It's interesting to hear you talk about the 365-day thing again. I did not know that about you, but it's pretty cool. And there's a synchronicity there because I'm working on like a full year-long thing right now. It's not directed towards joy specifically. It's a different I'm not going to give the surprise away. It's a different angle I'm taking, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really interesting, again, the synchronicities, but it's also cool that you've got this mindset of, well, it is all about joy and it's about finding a way. And I'm curious, like, what is your personal number one go-to for feeling joy on autopilot whenever you need to?
For me, it's nature. I'm a huge
Mm.
nature person. And it's because it's readily available all the time. You literally open your door, at least where I live around forest. I live half time in Portland, Oregon, half time in Bend, Oregon, which both are very beautiful. So I'm very, very blessed for where I live. But even no matter where you live, you can just open the window, especially in the spring and the summer, and listen to the birds. The
Hmm.
birds bring me so much joy. But the one thing, Andrew, that I've learned with my 365 days journey was there are days I do not feel joy. Like, let's keep it real. Like, I had horrible days. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I'm like dragging my feet. I'm depressed and sad. What all these emotions we all go through, which I tell people all the time. We don't need to be happy all the time. You need to be real all the time. But joy is something we can access even if we're down. So those days, because I committed to my joy videos, I had to show up, and I'm like feeling like crap. I'm like, okay, I have to find something. And what I found, because I'm so spiritual, oftentimes when I released it to God or to spirit and say, what, help me find that joy, I would get a message. I would get a synchronicity sign and something to inspire me, or I'd be called to do my oracle cards, or there's always ways to find joy. And I just did a whole series on my podcast about the Book of Joy, which is an interview with Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. When you are struggling, you find compassion within yourself. You find compassion for others. You want to help others. And that's where joy is helping others. So another thing I do is I give whenever I can, whether it's, smiling at the person walking by, or it's, doing something nice, paying for someone's coffee, or, for me in my podcast, when I interview people like you and I want to bring out your joy, that brings me joy. Mm-hmm. So, but the easiest one for me has been nature. But when you realize that everybody has joy accessible, it's different from happiness, because happiness seems like more of like this one thing is something that it's like a happy place, but joy is like the little things.
Right.
So
yeah,
anyway.
it's interesting because for me, that's actually part of the reason why I have so many techniques in the book, because I'm operating under this theory that everyone's got access to joy, but people experience it so differently. It's really more about like giving yourself permission to experiment and try things out and see how you feel, and not beat yourself up if the specific thing that you're trying that day doesn't necessarily inspire joy in you, because it's not a failure. That's just simply one indicator and a piece of information that you need, so that when you move on to the next thing, you're more readily available to experience joy in that way instead.
Yeah. And, sometimes, again, I have to bring up the bad days, because we all have them, including me. And when I have those bad days, what brings me joy is just putting my hand in my heart and say, it's okay. It's okay. Because when we judge ourselves for being upset, especially as people like, positivity, like, oh my gosh, I'm not being positive today. Beating yourself down is worse. It's best to just say, it's okay. And actually, I did an experiment once, and I was working as a nurse, which can be a very negative environment. If anyone who's listening has worked in healthcare, they know it's not always pretty. But what I did, I heard that this experiment where for an entire week, you only say positive things for an entire week, right? And I'm like, oh, I could totally do this. This will be fun, right? Because I'm really positive. It was so hard, Andrew. By the end of like day 3, and what happens if you mess up, you go back to day 1. Right. It's not easy. And finally, actually, after day 4 or 5, I just started throwing out profanities. I'm like, I need to get this out. So I'm more about like, we need to feel all of those ups and downs. And, again, I'm an Abraham Hicks fan, and Abraham talks the 5 steps, which I'm not sure if your audience is familiar with that. Do you mind if I share that?
I don't know. I mean, like, I'm aware of Abraham. I don't know which readers went to Abraham first and which ones didn't. But it really comes back down to, again, you just following. I like to keep things as simple as possible. Yeah. And I did want to highlight something that you'd mentioned here, because I was fishing a little bit before when I was asking you different questions, and you hit on the thing I was looking for, because I wanted to give people listening one way by which you do it, and you do it intuitively. I don't think you even realize that you default to this, but that tactic or technique of putting your hand on your chest and saying it's okay, that I think is such a highly valuable thing that's very easy to overlook in the conversation if people aren't listening. But when I heard you say that, I immediately got this feeling like, let me highlight that for people, because I believe other people listening, when they're having bad days, that is exactly the thing that they can do, believe it or not, to really set themselves at ease. So thank you for sneaking that one in, because I did want to highlight that.
Thank you.
And I want to move on to something really important, because this journey began for you, at least the beginning of it was inspired or initiated by your disappointment in where your love life was at that point. I wanted to ask you, where are you with that right now?
Oh, very good question. I am with my soulmate, but it took 6.5 years to find him. So that, I'm glad you brought that up, because here I got into law of attraction to find my soulmate, but what I found was something so much better. And he, of course, I'm so lucky to have him. And he's like the absolute icing on the cake. But it took 6.5 years to get in, because I think in that journey, I started teaching law of attraction. I started, finding out who I really was. Because the thing about law of attraction, what I take it as, it's more of a personal development thing, because law of attraction is you have to take full responsibility for your life. And so if you start attracting things, it's an opportunity, or people mirror things back to you. It's an opportunity for you to heal and to grow. And so I've always taken it as like, okay, why is this situation showing up for me? Why am I struggling so hard to find my soulmate? What within me needs to be healed? And I had a lot of hurt and pain from my ex-husband and from my childhood. And so it gave me the opportunity to say, no, I'm going to get real. I'm going to heal this, because I keep seeing this mirror of things that aren't jiving. I kept attracting men who were selfish. Even though I did all the work, I still was attracting it. So then I had to go back down. Okay, what within me still needs to heal? And so I'm grateful it took me so long to manifest him, because in the meantime, I wrote a book. My meetup group took off. I started a coaching practice. If I met him right away, I don't know if I would have gotten to this place.
Yeah.
So to me, I always come back to the divine and spirit. It has a better plan for me than I could even imagine with my ego brain.
Right.
That's the path I choose to follow.
And obviously better than me whether you agree with this or not, but me hearing you say this, from the outside looking in, I'm interpreting part of what you're saying here as part of the reason why it took 6.5 years is in some way, shape, or form, there was still a focus on those negative things, on those men that weren't right for you. Not that you were like intensely like there staring at it,
Mm-hmm.
but it was kind of like it was in the space, and it was something you were aware of. And again, I don't know if you agree with this or not. And this is actually great, because I want to have guests on where I don't know if we're going to agree with everything or not, but I'm theoretically going backwards in time,
Mm-hmm.
not knowing how it would have gone. And I would suggest that it would have been a faster process if you were crazy and maniacal like me, and like, okay, for every day, I'm just going to do this one method, and I'm going to focus on this one positive thing and let whatever happens, happens. But again, that you have a different, unique perspective. So I'm not sure if you agree with that, or if you feel it could have broken down in a different way.
I think for me, because I did all the law of attraction things, I did, but was I perfect at it? No. So that could have been it. But like I pretended my soulmate was with me. I had fake dinners with him. I'd make meals, and I would literally sit and talk to him. Imagine it. I'd be in my car and I'd hold his hand. I'd write stories, and like, because I'm a writer, so I'd write like, this huge, like a day in our life, what it would look like. And I did meditations all the time. I visualized him. But what happened, which is why it's so frustrating with reality, is when I go out there and date and I get this guy that was not jiving with me, looking back, you're right, I would go, ugh, there it is again. I would start that negative tape. Oh, that's all that's out there. And so I had a lot of friends around me who were like, oh, like right when I got divorced, I had this woman tell me, she goes, and she was almost 40. She goes, by the way, Michelle, once you turn 40, men don't even look at you. So just be
Well, what
prepared.
a
I'm like,
wonderful message to be reinforced, right? Like that's not going to hold
right.
us back.
So I was fed a lot of that, and we all are fed a lot of that. And I had all these friends like, oh, there's no good men out there. And so I had to literally go like, la, 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 la. I don't
Yes.
hear you. This is what I want. But I know for me, even though my focus was that, there was some inner child work that I had to do to finally change things. And that's
Right.
how I finally attracted my soulmate. So it was a process for sure.
Now, looking back on that, again, there's different pieces that you're attributing to this happening. Seeing as how this is like a law of attraction channel, what aspects of law of attraction in terms of processes that you put yourself through do you attribute that contributed to you meeting this person? Was there any method, in other words, that felt good, that didn't have that resistance, or that didn't kind of grab your attention when you were on a date that you didn't like? Was there something, in other words, was there a certain method that you really enjoyed and experienced peace and fulfillment through when you were doing it?
I started to change my perspective on dating. That really helped. What I did is I took everyone I dated, and this can go with all areas of real life, by the way, but every guy I dated, I would focus on the one area or two areas that I liked about him. And one thing I remember specifically is I went out with a guy once who opened the car door for me. And I'm like, oh, well, that was really nice. I've never had someone do that for me.
Mm.
And so I said, I want more of that. I would say out loud, more of that, more of that. The next guy I went out with, he not only opened the car door, but he put my jacket on for me. I'm like, oh, okay, more of that. And what's fascinating is every guy I dated after that would do all these great chivalrous things for me, to the point where my soulmate, he literally puts my seatbelt on for me every time in the car.
Mm-hmm.
He carries everything for me. He's the most kind, gentlemanly human on this planet. But I think it's because I set that intention. Oh, I like that. I like this, and it's getting better, and there's more of that. And I just kept seeing, I like that. And I practice with my guy friends too. I let them
So,
like do things for me, you
so I
know?
think this is really important. Thank you for sharing that. And this is actually great because again, my channel is so young right now that probably 90% of the people watching the videos have read my book. So they're coming at it from a very specific perspective. Me interpreting what you said there, I like that. And oh, look at that. I kind of see that as basically your version of a gratitude exercise where you were feeling grateful for these things that you liked, which therefore reinforced them. And it snowballed and it avalanched to the point where the man that you're finally with had all those qualities that you were appreciating as you were building your way up to it. So I want to highlight that again. Thank you for bringing it up, but also to note to people when they hear something like that, it's very important, at least in my perspective. There's a lot of ways by which gratitude might be described without even using the word gratitude. In fact,
Mhm.
you know, again, like I said, I know an extent about Abraham. I remember talking to an Abraham person about gratitude, and they're like, gratitude's a lower level, it's appreciation. And then back in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm like, it's the same thing. You're using a different word. But if you're describing, if I'm using my description of gratitude and you're using your description of appreciation, it's actually the same spirit, the same thing. Now, again, certain Abraham fans want to agree with that, but I'm
Mhm.
saying by the way that person was describing it. So again, I just want to reinforce that. Thank you for saying it in a certain way to remind people that you know, these methods, whether it's mine or another book or anywhere else, they all have a certain level of value because when you get to the heart of them, it really is about putting that positive focus, which reinforces your attention, which really gets you there.
Right, right, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, I guess we're almost out of time here, but I guess I want to ask, like, what are you doing right now, like law of attraction related? Where again, is there a method or a style or approach or an intention that you're having that you're trying to reinforce right now that listeners hearing you might be able to learn from or be inspired by?
Well, the one thing talking about the soulmate stuff made me think about why I even started my podcast is because I love to hear stories where people are succeeding in law of attraction, whether it's finding your soulmate, whether it's making money, whether it's, you know, I've had guests on my show who've cured themselves from cancer, incurable diseases. Like, I've had so many stories. And for me, when I was looking for love, one of the other things that helped is I kept reading stories on soulmate love to keep me in that vision of like, this is possible, this is possible. So I started the podcast with the intention that if people hear more stories of this stuff really, really works from their real life experience, then you start to become a believer, because
Mm,
you'll hear a lot of negativity, but we want to come to a place where you hear like anything is possible. In fact, I love the word I'm possible. Impossible is I'm possible, right? So
right.
I believe there's nothing. I actually did another thing called 365 days of miracle moments. I did that 5 days between the first videos and the second. So I did 2 years of videos because, again, I believe in miracles. And so for me, my process has become sharing stories, give people hope, hear that anything is possible, because that inspires me. When I hear these stories and I go, oh, okay, this happened to them, this can happen to me then.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I love to teach.
See, it's funny because when you were describing that, that's immediately where I went to in my mind. Like, oh, Michelle's doing this cool thing where she's sharing these stories and inspiring others. But by that same token, it's almost, again, I'm all about strategies. This is another way by which she can remind herself of all the possibilities and remind herself of all the magic and everything that can be done and everything that's happened and everything that flies in the face of conventional wisdom that says no. You're
Right.
reminding yourself of all the reasons why it can still be yes, thereby laying the pathway and clearing the obstacles for those yeses to continue to appear in your life and being reinforced. So
Right.
that's awesome. And that's actually another reason why, like me, I always like, I love the emails that I get from readers when they give me those success stories, because
Yeah.
for me, it becomes a repeated affirmation. So I'm completely with you on that
Right.
wavelength.
Right. And the
Um,
more people that share their stories, the more we're going to believe it for everybody, you know?
yes. And
Yeah.
before I forget, just because I'm sure people will be curious, even though I will have a link in the description, what is the name of your podcast if people want to seek it out?
It's called Law of Attraction in Action.
Beautiful. Law of
Yeah.
Attraction
And
in
it can be
Action.
heard everywhere podcasts are heard.
I love the name.
Yeah.
So, Michele, last question for you, and this can go in any direction that you want. But if there was one piece of law of attraction related advice that you would want to share with people listening right now, in any way that you're inspired to that you think might help somebody, what is that advice that you would share?
Just follow your joy. To me, it always comes back to that. Follow your joy. Trust that that joy is leading you in the path. It's leading to your soulmate. It's leading you to the next paycheck. It's leading you to your career, your passion and purpose. It always starts with joy. And so if you can focus on that every day, you will see your life take off. I really believe that.
Michele, I couldn't think of a better way to end the interview on such a high note. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your perspective and your insight and your wisdom and giving people a glimpse of like how you have employed law of attraction and just self-development in your life. I'm sure a lot of people listening right now really appreciate it, and I know I do.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this.